There we go. See, that's why I warn everyone before I do it, Okay, so the first question I had for the panel, DEI is becoming a buzzword in our industry, but what does it actually mean?
So I can take that unless you wanted to call on one of us.
Anyone, whoever wants to take it.
So I work in a very unique, somewhat unusual, however, not as unusual for the DC area, but my lens is really people with disabilities. So it's not only what we call at Hilton team members, but then also guests who are coming to stay at our properties. And in the world of DE&I, for me, it is really talking about and elevating the awareness that people with disabilities fall into this group and cut across every other type of group. And so when we talk about inclusion and also equity, I don't know that we always understand what those terms mean, especially when you're talking about a population who has to interact with our digital world, with our physical world in ways that require adaptation. So to me, the buzzword that goes along with DE&I is really about allowing everyone in our society to live, interact in the ways in which they need, want, and expect to.
That sounds perfect. And Tiki or Angela, did you have anything to add to that?
Go ahead, Tiki. You look like you're going to say something.
Well, I think we're both so like, we're all very, servant. Like, you go first. No, you go first. We're also very so, as a person of color, I bring that lens, right? And I've never existed without words like diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think it really boils down, like, what does it mean to me? It means justice. It means access and accountability. And so when I think about JEDI work, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I think about the work we as a human race need to do in all facets. Thank you, Nicole, for bringing up some other types of abilities that are not always seen, other ways of being or identities that you have or may have that aren't always seen, right? I'm left-handed. That's a funny one, right? People don't think about that. But my whole life, I've had to adapt things because there's not much out here for lefties, right? That's a silly, small example, but could really impact folks in different ways. And so when I think about JEDI work, it's really about access and justice, really, because we can't have one without the other.
And I'll hook onto that
word.
Yes, I'll hook onto that, Tiki. I love JEDI too. I didn't know what JEDI was, but I was like, ooh, this is going to be good. So I spent 20 years working in the credit union movement. And as you can see by looking at me, I can hide my others pretty well. I am a left-handed Polish lesbian who is asthmatic and overweight, right? So like, I feel like I check a lot of boxes, but other than being overweight, you don't really know any of those things about me. And yet, especially if we're talking, well, whether we're talking virtual or whether we're talking face-to-face, there are different things that I personally notice. And what we're kind of skirting around here is the term intersectionality, which you all may be very familiar with. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term, not even sure how many years ago. I could ask my wife because she's in the other room and she's a DEI specialist. But what that means is I am more than a female. I am more than a white woman. I am more than a lesbian. I am all of the things. And until we start to recognize the whole person, we're not truly looking at equity, and we're not truly looking at inclusion. And I would say that for the better part of 20 years, when I was at CUNA, I was not out when I went to my schools and conferences. I wasn't, because you just didn't know what someone's politics were. You didn't know what their religious beliefs were, and people didn't always wear that on their sleeves. I assumed that people were a little bit more conservative in certain areas of the country. That was my own bias that I carried with me, but I needed to protect myself from anything that might come my way. And I also didn't want to be known as that gay lady from CUNA, right? So there are things that all of us carry that we don't know about. So Tiki, left-handeds unite. Woohoo!
My son's actually going to be thrilled with this conversation because he's a left-hander, and I hear about it all the time, how difficult it is. I bought him a pair of left-handed scissors, and you would have thought I bought him the world. And it never occurred to me that that was like such a hassle for you guys. So
I was born left-handed. I'm still left-handed. I'm cis-handed and cisgendered.
That's perfect. I love that. I'm actually going to write that down for him. So we're all in the meetings industry, but so what are the most important factors to consider during the planning process for an event to ensure that we are diverse, equitable, and inclusive?
I'd like to start. It starts in the very conceptualization of the event. There are so many ways that we as a people could do better. What research do you do into the cities that you decide to go to? What research do you do in the properties you decide to frequent? What does management look like? Is it representative of what their company statement says, or does it look like a caste system where people of color are on the bottom and then others are on the top? Think about your conference planning committee. Is it representative of your membership or the aspiration of your membership? Are you in an indigenous area? Have you honored the space that you're coming into? What vendors do you choose to use? Who do you go to look for vendors? Who helps you curate the list of vendors? Whether, we all know the big names in AV or in, outside catering if you're going to bring it in, but are there opportunities for you to look harder and dig deeper? This work is hard and it is not easy. And so I think about who do you invite to the table? Who has input on the curriculum or what you plan to cover in your conferences? What do your speakers look like? What do they espouse? What presenting and non-presenting identities do they espouse or talk about? What work has your team done internally to look at their own biases before they can even start to go out somewhere else? I think in my organization, we take a look at all of that. If you work with us, there are things in our RFP that hotels have to do, like you have to have an all-gender restroom, and the sign cannot be paper covering up the restroom. You actually have to make a sign that looks like your regular signs, or we won't come to you. We're actually beginning a process by which we will start to include smudging spaces in our conferences and events. And so right now I'm in the middle of working with our Indigenous knowledge community to come up with the one-pager to do that educational piece about why smudging is so important. And so if you think about the planning process, you have to think about what the outcome is and be truthful with yourselves and know your own limitations, right? I don't know enough about smudging spaces. And so I have to go find folk who, even though I do my own work, will also make sure that I'm along the right track. And so when you think about that, whether you're in person or virtually, you have to think about where you are, where you sit, who's invited, who you think about. If you think about different accessibility needs and how are you meeting those needs? Everybody's like, oh, we'll just, get cart service, or oh, we'll transcribe it. But are there other opportunities to bring in folks of the community that you hope to serve to get their input into what you're building?
And Tiki, I'll hook on to what you just said because it starts in the planning phases. How many times have you gone to fill out a registration form and it asks you for your titles and you get Mr. or Mrs. or Miss? You don't get MX. Mix is a gender neutral honorific. So think about that. If you require people to reveal their gender, think about why. Why does it matter that people are revealing their gender? What risks are we opening up our attendees to by making them come out to us before they even get to see us face to face? If there is some reason that you need to get that information, you need to gather that information, look into other options besides male, female, and other, because nobody wants to be an other. Nobody wants to say my whole life is wrapped up in a box that says other. So think about those types of things. As far as being face to face, there are things that we can do to respect each other that doesn't have to make it feel like we're coming down heavy handed on anything. I think sometimes people get shy around DEI or like some of the people that I used to work with would say, I just don't even tell any jokes anymore because I don't want to offend anybody and I don't know what's offensive. And it's not about that. It's being open and accepting of people correcting you. One of the things that I like to say as far as being face to face, because of my asthma, I'm very, very sensitive to smells. I don't want to walk through a cloud of cigarette smoke on the way into the building. So as Tiki said, check out your site ahead of time. I don't want to sit next to somebody who is trying Kim Kardashian's latest perfume because I will not be able to sit there, right? In the same vein, I have a brother who uses a chair. And so when he approaches, yes, we say you have to have accessibility of your buildings, but have you tested the buttons in your buildings to make sure that those accessible doors are really accessible? Just because the button is there doesn't mean it works. I will pass that one gently to Nicole because I know I'm getting into your territory as well.
Yeah, so again, everything Angela and Tiki that you have said, spot on. And when you're talking about accessibility and you're talking meetings and you're talking a group of people who have a disability, it's not just those who are in a chair, as you said, Angela, or in a wheelchair. It could be those who have an unseen, a cognitive disability. It could be someone who has a hearing impairment, someone who is partially blind, low vision, fully blind, service animals. And so again, I can't emphasize enough in thinking about at the planning stage, asking yourselves about this. If you are going to ask the questions, be prepared to respond to the responses that you get. So what I mean by that, the form that you said, Angela, and you referenced, in the disability community, you need to ask, do you need an accommodation? You need to be prepared to provide that accommodation. It isn't just a transcript. What if an audio description is needed? If you're in a physical space, have you thought about how the room is set up? Are you prepared to have someone walk around the room with a microphone? Don't assume that everybody can just get up easily and come to a mic at the beginning of the front of the stage. If you're in these big conference rooms and you're presenting, again, real-time sign language interpretation. Don't just go with CART. People assume various things. People assume, oh, everyone who is blind knows how to read Braille. No, that's not right. And everyone who is deaf understands English. That's not right. Sign language is their primary language. English is their second language. So check your assumptions at the door. When you are in digital spaces, you really have to assume that every single person in the meeting is different and has a different need. It could be language preferences. Choose a meeting platform that enables captioning in different languages. Choose a platform that enables live transcription. Zoom happens to be one of the more accessible products in the market space right now. Speakers, when you're presenting, if you're giving slides, you need to describe the slides. You can't assume that A, from a cognitive perspective, everyone understands exactly what you're saying. You think about your language choice. And B, not everyone can see it. And what if you're using color, right? And you reference, oh, if you look at the red trend line, well, color blindness, the percentage of male population that has color blindness is very high. They may not see the red trend line. So there's a lot of different things. And in my work with Hilton's Abilities TMRG, which is a business resource group, we talk a lot about how to really approach this topic of inclusion and what it means. And a lot of it distills down to don't assume, but ask. So if you are in at an event and you see someone who is walking through the event space with a cane, don't assume they need help, right? You may go and ask, and if they say, I don't need help, they don't need help. But if they do need help, then say, how can I help you? You don't want to take their arm. They may want to hold your elbow. They may want to place their hand on your shoulder. The same with a person who is in a wheelchair. They may or may not need assistance. So asking and not making the assumptions. I'll stop there.
I'm going to hook on to what you said too. Evidently, I'm really good at hooking on and not having original thoughts. So you know what, whatever. So going back to accessibility, when you have a buffet as opposed to a seated meal, it is very, very difficult for someone who uses crutches or someone who's in a chair to navigate a buffet. And I'll just put that out there. Or if you have a cocktail reception where people are standing around and they're all using the higher tables, that's very difficult for someone in a chair. My brother, who is a senior vice president at a bank, doesn't attend the majority of the social events because he doesn't want to be put in a position where he's making the meeting planners feel uncomfortable. Wow, right? So let me go back now to the digital space just a little bit. One of the things that Zoom has available, and thank you for doing this on Zoom, you can add your pronouns into your profile on Zoom. I encourage everyone to sign up for their own free Zoom account, because when you do that, you're allowed to put your pronouns in. And then at the start of every meeting, you can choose, do I want to have my pronouns on or off? You can also have them automatically appear. So I've got my pronouns automatically appearing. One of the other things that I like to point out, especially when it comes to Zoom, is that you've got the ability to change the tone, the skin tone of your avatars. So when I do a thumbs up, let's see if I can do a reaction here. When I do a thumbs up, it's not gold, it's not white, it's something in the middle. You can easily change that if you look at your video filter settings or any of your settings. When you click on general, you can do this with me if you want. So click on video settings or virtual background settings, and then click on general, which is the very top option. I can pick my skin tone. So go ahead and change that, and then it'll stay that way for everybody. What was that, Tiki?
I was going to say a couple things I'd like to dovetail on to. I'm not going to hook, I'll dovetail. One of the things is you can set that at the profile level, but you have a choice every time you log into a virtual space. So in this particular Zoom meeting, my pronouns aren't part of my profile because I changed the name so much. Sometimes I'm Naspatiki and everything runs off. And so I change them at the start of every meeting to be reflective of how I want to be in the space. The other thing I can't say enough about is the personal touch. Nicole, you mentioned, asking folk about what you can do to help them. You know, one of the things we do, if you think about part of the planning process, we ask an accessibility accommodation question in our registration, and then we call every single person, whether there are 8,000 attendees or 45. And we ask them, how can we help make your conference experience the best it can be? And sometimes it's tiny little things that mean so much and go so far. So I would suggest that. And then the last thing in the planning process about DEI work is, what does it look like? First, for those who are able to see what your conference website looks like, tells me whether or not I'm welcome there. What your print material looks like tells me whether or not I'm welcome there. What the hotel's website looks like tells me whether or not I'm welcome there, and whether or not any of my identities may be presented in those spaces. And so you want to think about what it looks like on your website, because that's what people see, what it looks like on your conference. What pictures do you choose to elevate? Do you have photographers that go around at your events and take candidates? Do you use those? And if so, if over and over you're finding it difficult to find pictures of different kind of folk, that gives you some information as well.
So I'm going to add just a little bit more. That's great that you all call with somebody who is requested an accommodation. Many times people will not consider themselves as having a disability simply because they are aging, or especially if it is a cognitive or a mental health related issue. So, you know, be aware of that. You know, as you're organizing and we're back to in person, there are also some small little details, maybe a quiet room, maybe a place that can decompress, and, you know, having the service animal release stations, but having that explicitly stated for guests. And then what's really also important is when we're talking about things like paying attention to your marketing material, your websites, do the people in the images look like me? Can I identify? You need to make sure that everything that you're producing is accessible, meaning that if you're producing a website, is it accessible to screen reader technology? Is it accessible to voice activation technology? Otherwise, you are that's another way of stating you're not inclusive. This is the piece where disabilities are part of DE&I. There are unique needs for that cuts across any other group that you may have. Don't assume that everybody can see. Be prepared to offer your conference material in alternative formats. It could be large text, it could be Braille, it could be some other format, but be prepared. Again, if you ask the question and you get the answer, you need to be prepared to fulfill it.
Absolutely agree with everything everyone just said. I recently learned that even if something says accessible, doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everyone. My parents recently came to visit me, and I put them up in a hotel because I live in a 4th row walk up, and my mom can't do that. So I got them an accessible room, but it was built for someone in a chair where everything was lower, and that's just not her specific disability. And she was like, the bed was too low for her. And even with everything being built lower, the shower wasn't a roll-in. She still had to step into the tub. And so I was like, we might as well have a normal room, thanks. Because it just wasn't, so not all accessibility is built the same. And it's something I would not have
in the
thought about.
hotel. Yeah, in the hotel space, in the United States, if you go through the Americans with Disabilities Act, there are very clear guidelines around numbers of accessible rooms and types of accessible rooms that hotel properties are required to have. But simply an accessible room does not equate that you will always have a roll-in shower. It may be an accessible bathtub. And so again, from a planning perspective, if those are considerations that need to be part of the event, it's best to call the hotel about those things. I mean, again, it's a complex world, but and when you're talking disabilities, there are just so many. I call them flavors. They're not even flavors, but needs, right? That people have, and it could be that someone's traveling and they are bringing a lift, or they will be renting a lift, and the hotel room may not have clearance underneath a bed in order to get the lift in there. Why do hotel rooms do that? You know, the number of lost socks that people have. You know, I mean, there's reasons, right? But again, it's really to ask and do your due diligence ahead of time.
Absolutely. And so now my favorite question is, what is the most overlooked aspect of DEI? Because it's going to be something that's completely obvious, and I cannot believe I didn't think about that.
Well, I'm going to go first. My perspective is that I in the work that I've done, it's really, while disabilities are in DE&I, they are not talked about at the same level. And that has become one of my personal missions and goals, is to always be there to represent, and then to use my role at Hilton to hire people who have disabilities and put them in the work setting as a way to demonstrate their value to the organization. But it also is a way to walk the talk of what we do, but then to give others exposure. Oh, I'm in a meeting and something is being shown on screen, and half my team has no idea what's going on. I've got a great team where they will actually raise their hand and they will say, could you please explain? Or in some jokes, they're like, no, I can't see that. You know, no, I can't reach that because I don't use a mouse. And it crosses everything that we do within the organization. Your HR required training, any of your emails, trying to do your 401ks, taking annual surveys. I mean, it spans every aspect of our enterprise.
Okay, I'll go. I think that the most overlooked aspect of DEI manifests itself in several ways, but it's the lack of looking internally, whether that's the DEI work that I need to do as a human to understand the journeys and the walks of others, my own work, whether it's my organization that needs to do some internal work, because not everybody's on that same page of thinking the same way about DEI. And, you know, look at our organizations. Who's at the top of the pyramids? Who are you promoting internally or externally? What kind of things are in place to intentionally recruit a diverse candidate pool? Right? Because if we always post in the same places and we always get the same folk, there are other ways to post jobs. So I think the work that we need to do internally, whether that's within our own self, understanding how we come into space, what privileges we have. One of the privileges I always think about is I identify as Christian. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East where I have been the minority. In this country, I'm the majority. They play Christmas music in the malls. There's a whole Hallmark channel full of Christmas music, you know, and I enjoy that privilege. But it makes me think about, when I think about other ways that I'm not privileged, I think about some of the ways that I am privileged and the work that I need to do, whether that's internally or with others. And then I look at and challenge my organization all the time and look at what is the work we're doing internally to make sure that that folks in our organization feel represented and heard and valued. Because you can do that for your members, but if you're not doing it for your own organization, you're going to see continued turnover, and your members will see what you all value. So I think that's very overlooked. We're very quick to be able to look what we did over here. Look at this pretty picture that's very diverse, whatever that means to you. But then we don't do the work ourselves. And then lastly, the challenge we have to do to our own families. That's the hard work when you're sitting around a table and your family member says something that kind of makes you twinge. You have a choice in that moment. Do you stand up or do you laugh it off? And I think that is those are the overlooked things, the internal stuff that we have to do, because if we truly believe it and value it, it will manifest itself in our work.
Very well said, Tiki. And I challenge everybody that's on this call to do what we call moving from being a small a ally to a capital A ally. When we talk about allyship, it means that you are going to be the one that speaks up, and a small a ally hears something or sees something and they don't say a word. They just go, oof, that doesn't feel good, that they put a Xerox sheet over the top of that, or that doesn't feel right, that someone's name was incorrect on their name badge and they were told just to cross it out because there was no printer on site so that my name badge can look the same as everyone else's. So being able to say something is a capital A ally, and being able to step up. I would say for me, the most overlooked aspect of DEI is empathy. Empathy for me is where we should all be starting, and it's where we should all live. And yet people don't necessarily get the difference between empathy and sympathy. I don't want your pity. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't want you to say, oh, they're there. It must be so difficult for you. I understand. I do a whole session about why you don't say I understand to somebody. So don't get me started because we've only got 5 minutes left here. But knowing what it's like to stand in someone else's skin and in their experience, and to be able to feel the emotion that they feel and then take action accordingly, is a level of empathy that not a lot of people get training on and not a lot of people experience. So for me, if we can be empathetic towards everyone else around us, that's going to go further in our DEI efforts than policies and procedures and having a lot of stuff written down.
Absolutely. And empathy is so huge for everything, really. It really, without empathy, where are we? And so I do want to try and fit in one last question, and then we'll see if we have any questions from the audience. But do you have any recommendations for getting stakeholders to accept or amplify our DEI priorities? Because we're a lot of government people here, and that tends to require a lot of buy-in. Like, we can get it, but that we may not be able to affect the change.
Research, hard data, right? And we all know that the research says that when we prioritize DEI, good stuff happens. And so being able to speak it in a language that makes folks value, I think it's about who you're talking to and how you can talk to them. I think you need to understand the definitions. You all need to have common definitions about what you mean about whatever you're talking about, whether it's big DEI stuff or little things like whatever word you're choosing to use. I think you need to understand the priorities of the organization, which you can actually commit to, because there is nothing more demoralizing than some big, wonderful 5-page letter that you send to the membership about we're committed, and then nothing ever happens, and your staff and your constituencies that particularly that may fall into some of these groups will not trust you. You gotta put your money, resources, people, time, effort where your mouth is. And so figuring out something you can commit to, again, to be able to move the data, see the return on investment, move the needle to see the return on investment, to be able to give them the data that they need. And I think being able to speak a language with what your folks value. What do they value and how do you use DEI to get there? And then it's kind of like a spinach smoothie, right? You put all that banana and fruit all around it and you got spinach in the middle, and before you know it, you're starting to change people's mindsets.
For me, I like to equate this to if someone in your audience has a peanut allergy, think about airplanes. If you get an announcement at the beginning of the flight that someone has a peanut allergy, everyone is on kind of high alert, right? We don't necessarily get that kind of buy-in for all of our DEI efforts. But if we can equate it to someone needs our help, that to me is a way that we can start to shift that narrative and really elevate what the changes that we're trying to make. So to me, it is finding a way that the other people in our organization can relate to. Because if they don't really get it, and if they can't empathize for whatever reason, it's on us to at least show them what that means. Then we also talk about showing an outward sign, like Tiki was saying, on our website, in our marketing, whatever it happens to be, allowing people to put rainbow ribbons on their lanyards, allowing people to choose titles that make sense for them so that they can show outwardly that they're supporting and that they're a capital A ally.
So I'm just going to, again, build on, it would be on the empathy piece, I call it storytelling or making it real, making the connections for others where they have that, oh, yeah, of course I wouldn't eat a peanut butter jelly sandwich on this enclosed airplane. So making it real in that way. And each and every one of us has the ability to also model. So in modeling consistent behavior, consistency in not only your words, but your behavior, I think also does a lot to sway and amplify the message for stakeholders.
One other area that I think is overlooked is people's status as far as military is concerned. We used to live next door to someone who had seen active combat. And let me tell you, 4th of July was not a celebration for him because there were so many people shooting off fireworks. I've actually been to meetings where they've shot off fireworks from the beach where everyone is standing and it is like explosions. So thinking about those types of things are not necessarily on our radar screen either. So it takes a village to be able to make sure that we are accessible to absolutely everyone. And I can't remember, I think Tiki, you were the one that said at the beginning, making sure your planning committee includes as many different opinions and experiences as possible is going to ensure that you've got a positive outcome.
And I need to add just one thing, because something you said struck me, Angela, is language is so powerful. And while we have hopefully the opportunity, I always say this is going to come out messy and I'm going to clean it up as I go away, like asking permission in the space to just come as a whole person. But I also am reflective of my usage of language and idioms and words and things that no longer belong in my language. Those are small ways you can demonstrate your commitment to growth, because really DEI work is just about growth. It's about growth and expanding what you know and your knowledge and your acceptance of others. So think about the language you use, stuff that my mom would say or our grandparents would say that you're thinking, let me tell you why that's not so great, Grandma, right? Like, let's talk about that. And you may not change Grandma's mind the first time, but at least it'll get her to thinking.
Hey, we're on a journey right now to eliminate the Midwest's favorite phrase, which is you guys.
May I offer the Pittsburghians, which means all y'all. That's what that means.
I
y'all.
like that because when I say all
yins.
y'all, they're like, you're from Wisconsin. You can't say all y'all. I'm like, yes, I can.
You can borrow yins.
I like yins.
Yins.
Thanks, Tiki. Yins.
It means like you youngins, yins.
Oh, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally a Florida girl, so y'all is definitely part of my vocabulary. And all y'all means, everyone. So I do want to open up the floor to see if we have any questions from our virtual audience tonight. Go ahead and raise your hand and unmute yourselves, and we'll see if we can get your questions answered. Oh, Deidre had one. Yes. That is so true.
Also, feel free to type in the chat if you don't want to unmute
Yes,
or
if you
are
don't wanna
unable
unmute,
to.
go ahead and type it in.
This is Deidre. I was just making a comment that sometimes we're trying to be very creative in our presentations. We want all this fancy lighting to go on, but that can cause people who have certain medical conditions, for example, somebody with epilepsy, to go into a seizure because it's doing something to their brain. So we have to be cognizant about that.
Absolutely, that's so true. And that's the last thing we want at a conference, is to cause an accident. And oh, Renee has her hand raised.
Yes, I appreciate all the panel's input, the perspectives that all of you shared. The intersectionality, I don't think I had heard that term. I saw someone mention that in the chat. So I appreciate that insight. And Tiki, I wanted to ask you, I was trying to listen and write at the same time, but wasn't successful. You mentioned Jedi. Do you mind just kind of re-highlighting that point that you meant earlier?
Sure. So at NASPA, we call it Jedi: Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So that's where Jedi comes. It's also a great play if you're a Star Wars fan, right? The Jedi Warriors.
Yes, I am.
Not. Right? It's also a great play. So
Justice, equity, diversion, and the I.
diversity and inclusion.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Wendy, I saw your hand go up.
So as a planner working with a supplier, is there anything that stands out in conversations with you that kind of resonates? Oh, wow, these people get it. They have their head wrapped around it.
So
For me, oh, go ahead. Nicole.
yeah, so Wendy, some of it, again, I'm not intimately familiar with the meeting planner space, but I do know that we at Hilton develop playbooks, and we put in guidance and for questions to be asked. So some of it I think would come down to, as a meeting planner, if you ask various questions of facilities and you get a deer in the headlight look, that would give you pause to say, or, maybe you're not speaking with the right person, but I would ask a lot of the questions about things that we have covered today. And if the responses say, well, I have to go back and look at that, or, yeah, we'll figure that out, you might want to dig a little deeper on those areas. But go ahead, Tiki.
Yeah, no. We put a lot of stuff in our RFP. We say, don't even bother. If you can't do these things, don't bother. We're not the right folks for you. We also, in our resumes, write very transparently about who we are as an association. In my hiring processes, when I work with vendors, I actually ask a Jedi-related question and listen to the response. I'm not looking for a bunch of keywords, looking for really where people are in their journey and whether or not there's an opportunity for us to work together.
And I think just like you would make sure that you've got adequate emergency procedures and now COVID procedures covered in your RFP, it should be a standard operating procedure that you're asking DEI questions as well.
Thank you. And I also have to say your point about the fireworks, how that can trigger what could be considered PTSD for some folks. Very much have something very relatable to that. I used to work with a former Marine, and being in Orlando, of course, helicopter tours are quite popular. Also the news, they're around, right? So, when the news cameras get to hovering, it wasn't necessarily the passing by of a helicopter, it was the hovering of helicopters. If there was, something on I-4 or something of that nature. So I knew it personally. I'm like, okay, I hear it. Eric's going to hear it. I would just walk into his office, pick the most random topic and just sit and talk to him, hopefully to distract him. And also so I could gauge, okay, is he okay with this? How are we working through that? You doing all right? You know, so I think that was very relative and very, to me, a relatable example. So I wanted to say thank you.
And Wendy, I think that's spot on, that if we can find for our stakeholders, if we can find that thing, whatever that thing is, my wife uses American Cancer Society and getting connected to something that means something to them that they can relate to. For some people, that empathy muscle needs a little bit more strengthening, a little bit more bodybuilding than for others. Find that thing that's near and dear to their heart and get them to start flexing those muscles and growing that empathy muscle. And Tiki, I'm reaching out to you right after, as soon as we're done, to connect with you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and it's so true. And it's sometimes it can be the most random of things. Like I hadn't considered until after moving here to the DC area, the amount of people who work at the Pentagon that can't handle a fire drill because of they were there on 9/11, and now a fire drill to them was their building was literally hit by a plane and on fire. And so just a random fire drill in the hotel, if they're not prepared for that, it's a whole episode for them to have to get through. So it can be the smallest of things that you don't even think about that you have to learn to adapt for in some of these cases. And I think that's a lot of what I feel like DEI is now, is the stuff you wouldn't normally think about because it doesn't normally affect you. So we have to broaden our eyesight, really, to our vision into looking at it from all angles instead of just our own. And were there any other audience questions? Okay, I don't see any other hands up. Do any of our panelists have any other comments?
So I would suggest for your teams to look at something along the lines of empathy mapping as an exercise. If you've never done it before, it's a tool that's out in the common domain, so it's free to anybody to do. It's something that I've been doing since 2003, and it never fails to really impact audiences. So with your planning committee, starting off by saying, who is this person we're trying to serve? What are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are they feeling? What are they saying? What are they doing? And what are their goals? And if you can really get inside what someone else is experiencing, that really helps you frame not only the experience that they're having, but also how you react to them when they're on site with you, or when they're on a space with you. So.
Muted. We do have a question.
Angela, to piggyback off what you were just sharing, do you have any specific ones that you utilize? I'm just curious to be able to use.
Specific templates for empathy mapping?
Yes.
Let me grab one for you and I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Perfect. Do we have, Tiki, do you have something you want to add?
I think that there's not a lot of time that we spend thinking about ourselves, and that's kind of been my message all along. And I encourage you all to read. I think along with empathy, one-on-one connections with folk who are different than you will impact you far more than any panel conversation could. And so I invite you to read things that make you uncomfortable. There are all kind of wonderful groups out there. One of my best friends, unbeknownst to me, I found out like a year into it, that she had joined a space for white folk, by white folk, struggling around racial inequalities. Who'd have thunk it? There's a Facebook group for that, so whatever it is you want to learn, there is somewhere that could in an entry point be non-threatening, right? Because it's scary, right? If I say the wrong thing, my career is over in this cancel culture that we have. So I would invite everyone to find a person who is different than you are and have good conversation around that. And if you don't have that person, hit me up. If I can't be that person for you, I will find that person for you.
Well, I think you're about to be a lot of people's new person here.
Come on.
And, but if we don't have any other audience questions, I'll give you a few minutes back, but we're gonna shift into a networking. So if everyone wants to just hang out and chat, we'll do that. But this has been a phenomenal panel. You guys were absolutely amazing. I have pages of notes, well, sticky notes, pages of sticky notes. That's how I work. You guys were absolutely, every single one of you, phenomenal. And I know Michelle said it before she left. She wanted a recording of this for the national board to go watch, just to make sure they're doing a good job with our national conference this year. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us tonight. And we'll go ahead. Oh, the empathy mapping link is in the chat. We love that. And oh, and Melody had a great idea that she wants to invite all y'all to NEC. So Tiki's on board, Mel, because she's from Pittsburgh. It's there, you know. She's gonna tell us where to go eat anyway. It's fine.
Pittsburgh is a beautiful city. I love Pittsburgh.
Cannot wait to go back for sure.
Go see my hometown.
Yes. And,
Thank you all.
This is Tecumseh Deloney as a member of the NEC Planning Committee. Tiki, I will be reaching out to you.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
so thank you. And everyone, if you want to hang out and network, we're gonna unspotlight us. Actually, Kim, did you do that? I don't know how to unspotlight myself. I only know how to spotlight it.
I did. I'll unspotlight him.
Thank you. But yeah, so we'll shift into networking. It's a little bit harder when we're virtual, but we like the oh, hi. We like the chance to still network. I'm changing it back to gallery on my end. I don't know what you guys see.
I'm trying to remove you from the spotlight, but I still see you in spotlight, Nicole. Okay, there you go.
There we go.